Hey guys, welcome back to How to Roll Dice. I'm Josh, and it's been a few days. Apologize for not uploading. Life's been really busy. Work's been really busy. And I wanted to sort of interject into my collection of haul videos from Gen Con 2022 with a couple of other videos. I might do this one and then get back to the final haul video and then move on to maybe a video on these paints or this little paint holder that I made here. But I wanted to, before we get too beyond, it being relevant, I wanted to make a quick video about the Mark IV announcement for Warmachine and Hordes, or as it is now referred to as Warmachine, because Hordes is gone. I'm sure everybody watching this video will already have read all of this, or I'm assuming most of you who are interested have read all of these articles and sort of formed your own opinions on them. But for those who haven't, or for those who for some reason care about what my take on this is, because I have gotten a lot of interest in my Privateer Press videos in the past. There's some of my more highly viewed videos. I wanted to make this video and give you sort of my take on the decision from Privateer Press. If you want to save a lot of time, here is my very short form take on the Mark IV announcement. I agree with absolutely every decision that they've made, and I worry that they're not going to survive the change. They're not going to live to see it come to fruition. But let's dive into some specifics. So first, I'm going to go over the actual sort of breakdown announcement, the bulleted announcement that was put out, basically explaining, okay, here's exactly what we're changing in Mark IV from sort of a company perspective as opposed to a gameplay mechanics perspective. We'll move on to that into a moment. I'm going to try to move through this as quickly as possible because, again, you've probably read all of this. You at least know most of this roughly, and there's a lot of it to get through, so I don't want this to be like a wicked long video. So first bullet, why, oh why are we doing this? The three things that they list are: new additions are controversial but necessary, living games have a shelf life, and maintaining positive perception requires a constant stream of releases. I don't necessarily know if I 100% agree with those. For example, chess hasn't had an update in quite a while, seems to be thriving. But I get what they're saying here. Basically, like, if you don't kind of keep up with your competition, you go stale. And if everybody else is getting shiny new toys every so often, or in this case, at one giant new toy box that holds all of your toys, to use a loose metaphor, then you're going to fall behind them and people are going to drift away from your game. And that's certainly been something that's been happening with Privateer Press. So I don't necessarily 100% agree with those takes, but I agree that something needed to be done. And this is probably the best thing to go with. Next up, we have how to blow up the world without hurting anyone. Obviously, their way of approaching how do we do a Mark IV without completely alienating and pissing off our entire fan base. The three larger bullets here, actually four bullets here, are: the existing catalog of miniatures for Warmachine and Hordes is overwhelming for players, retailers, and distributors, and continuing to expand upon that catalog exacerbates the problem the problems that result from it. I have said this exact thing in previous videos. Go back and look at my video when Warcaster first got announced and some of the new expansions or factions that were being announced in that same window of time. I believe it was the keynote maybe 2 or 3 years ago. And I was saying this exact thing, that there is an absolute crazy bloat of miniatures, and to even know and understand all of the miniatures for a single faction would take basically all of your spare time. To try to do that for the ever-growing list of factions for the entire game is an absolutely mind-blowing effort that you would have to undergo. So 100% agree there. I've said the exact same words. In order to maintain the playability of the entire catalog of existing models, we have created 2 arenas of play. Now, this is where they go kind of the Magic the Gathering route. They've decided to do something called Unlimited, which will allow all existing and new Mark IV models to be playable. Now, that's an important note. I'll come back to that. And Prime, which will provide limited model options in building armies from the pre-existing catalog, so limited options from existing models, as well as the entire Mark IV catalog of new releases going forward. I think that's a good idea. I've always preferred in games like Magic the Gathering that have a very long legacy of releases, that have so many like intermingling rules that can break each other very easily, that have these infinite lists of playable options, that having a sort of play set or an arena of play, as they refer to it here, that limits or drastically reduces the number of options that can be taken in favor of perfecting the balance of the game and keeping everything fresh and keeping things feeling new from one season to the next. I feel like that's the best way for this style of game to go, and I really love this idea. Now, is it going to absolutely screw anybody that has a large collection of existing models as far as the unlimited option goes? Yes. No one is going to want to play unlimited. You're going to want to play unlimited because at first you're going to be like, oh, well, I have all my models and I love this faction. I love this caster. I love this list that I've always had a good time with. Not only has that but not only has this been the case from one sort of addition to the next, one revision to the next with many games, but specifically Privateer Press, say, for example, second Mark II, second edition, whatever you want to call it, Mark II to Mark III. Basically, you had to throw all your lists out entirely. The game got too revamped, and that wasn't anywhere near as big a change as Mark IV, Mark III to Mark IV is going to be. So yeah, all of your lists are going to get thrown out, but in this case, they're probably never coming back. I would say, just having read quite a bit on this and looked at everything that's come out since then and gotten what I feel is a pretty good grasp on what they're trying to do here, 85% of the stuff that you own is never going to be pulled forward into Mark IV in a functional, balanced way, and is always going to be stuck in Unlimited. And nobody's going to want to play Unlimited because it's going to be the Wild West of like broken, unbalanced rules and lists. So whenever you go for a tournament, whenever you're going for competitive play, whenever you're playing somebody who seriously wants to have a balanced play experience, you're going to be playing Prime, which means a good deal of what you own and what you love is officially the past, and it's gone, and we're going to be moving forward. I don't have a problem with that because, again, one of the largest problems with the game is there's too much and it's impossible to maintain. So they're kind of like chopping the head off at the shoulders here, letting the rest of the body collapse to the floor, and going, okay, we're gonna take this really like nice part here, and we're gonna build from there out. So yeah, there's that. Moving on from there, new mechanics created for Mark IV, such as Warjack customization, are not backwards compatible with existing models. This backs up exactly what I was just saying, and we'll come back to this in a minute because they go into greater detail. It will take at least until the at least keywords there, at least until the end of 2023 before we can release Mark IV rules conversions for all existing models. I feel like that's going to be an indefinitely moving goalpost. I don't think they are ever going to have well-designed, balanced rules out for 100% of the existing models. And this is part of what I meant when I said earlier, I don't know if they're going to survive the transition. I love everything that they've pitched as part of the transition. I don't know if they're going to be able to hold their breath until they make it to the end of this underwater tunnel. They may drown partway through. But anywho, so that is what they have listed under how to blow up the world without hurting anyone. You can't. You're going to hurt people. I think you're going to salvage far more and bring back more players that have left than you are going to lose existing players. Because frankly, people that are currently enjoying Warmachine and Hordes, I don't understand why. And I think you might just like bad games. And games with major dilemmas that they have not yet, up until this point, delivered any kind of an answer for. I don't know why you would like that kind of a game. So if you're mad about these changes, other than a few, which I could kind of see your take on, as somebody who owns probably close to $10,000 worth of investment into this game since Mark I, I am not upset about these. So you might be, but I would disagree with you. Moving on to the next bullet here, we have... and there's quite a bit of write-up on each of these that I'm skipping past. You can go back and read it on your own if you haven't. Factions and armies and cadres, oh my. So basically what they're saying here, I'll go through the 3 bullet points real quick. In Mark IV, the force you put on the table is an army, which is a subset of a faction. This is where we start, like I said, Magic the Gathering is kind of where you get that feel of, or I feel like they borrowed from Magic the Gathering, the idea of an unlimited versus a prime, or as we might know it, a legacy/modern versus a standard in the Magic the Gathering community. I agree with the decision, but that very much feels like where they got the influence. Here, this is where I feel like they start to go heavily into the Warhammer 40K realm of, oh, I like that idea. I'm going to pluck that idea. I'm going to pluck this idea. I'm going to pluck that idea. And it starts to feel very like, oh, you looked at the things that work in 40K that your game could probably benefit from, and you just gently pulled them into your rule set and your game design. So in Mark IV, you're playing an army, not a faction. That's very 40K. You don't play Space Marines. You play Grey Wolves. You play Thousand Suns. You play Blood Angels. You don't play Space Marines as a faction. You play a subset of that faction, which is an army. They can even war against each other within that faction. Models from armies within the same faction are not compatible. Now, they kind of go on to say, except for these, but what they're basically saying, like I just said, is if you have a specialty unit or a specialty leader or a warcaster or a character that exists specifically within an army, again, to reference Warhammer 40K, because I feel like it's popular enough to do that, if you have a character that specifically exists inside of the Thousand Suns army, you can't play that character inside of Blood Angels. That character only exists in that army, even though they're part of the same faction. It would never happen, and so you can't play it. And that allows for easier balance and for the need to memorize a smaller list of possible options for your army, because your army is smaller than your whole faction. They're solving problems here. I like this. They're borrowing heavily from existing games, but that's fine because those games are very successful and for a good reason. And they're not giving up on the things that make them Warmachine and Hordes. Then Cadres provide small subsets of a faction that are compatible with all armies within a faction. Again, this is what I was saying. It's like models from one unit aren't compatible with models from another unit, unless they're a cadre of that faction, in which case they may be able to play across multiple armies of that faction. Basically, these are going to be some generic units, some solos, and some possible characters that make sense in multiple different armies from within the same faction. And of course you would need that. That makes perfect sense. So where's the beef? This is a question being raised of like, why haven't we mentioned Hordes at all yet? Hordes will no longer be a separately maintained brand. Hordes rules will be rolled into Warmachine. Now, don't panic. They're very clearly not saying we are getting rid of Hordes. They're not getting rid of Warlocks. They're not getting rid of Fury. They're not getting rid of War Beasts. It is still going to be two very different styles of gameplay. But from a business perspective, having two different names to your essentially one game is very confusing to new players of that game and to prospective players of that game when they're trying to figure out, well, what do you mean it's Warmachine and Hordes? But they play together. But it's two games, but they play the same, but they're different. It's very confusing. You kind of have to go through like 20 minutes of explaining it to people when they first get into the game, because it's an interesting concept that no other companies really use, or at least they maybe started out using, but they've evolved beyond. And that's what Privateer Press is doing here. They're saying from a business perspective, it doesn't make sense to call ourselves two different companies, two different brands. They are one. They have different sort of subsets of rules, but they are now one. They are Warmachine. Frankly, I think it would have been cool if they took a cue from their player base and called it Warmahordes, but I get that that's like an ugly name. That's another thing. Like if somebody was coming into the game and they said, I play Warmahordes. Have you ever tried it? Well, what's Warmahordes? Well, it's Warmachine and Hordes. Well, what's that? It's two separate games. Well, why do you call it Warmahordes? Because it's really one game. And now you're going down this rabbit hole. So totally understand the move there. Good business decision. Surprising it took them this long to do it. The first four armies of Mark IV will be Warcaster led. So again, army being a subset of a faction. So think specifically like a Stormbringers or a Grey Lords or the Mage Hunters of Ios or Eos, however you want to pronounce it. That is what they mean when they say armies, not the whole faction. So the first four armies, army boxes that are going to be released are going to be specifically Warcaster led. We now have to say Warcaster led, Warlock led, because everything is Warmachine, not Warmachine and Hordes. So now you have to define by the leader of that army which subset of rules you're playing with. So the first four boxes, or the first four armies released for Mark IV, are going to be Warcaster-led. Two all-new Warlock-led armies, so again, subsets of factions, we don't know what they are yet, or at least in this article, we don't know what they are yet. Two new Warlock-led armies will be launched in 2023. When in 2023? Quite a ways into 2023, like towards the end of 2023 is going to be my guess, possibly even slipping into 2024 if the delays with some of their recent products of the last couple of years are sort of a hint. So again, I don't disagree with any of these decisions, merging the two brands into one, focusing on Warmachine or Warcaster-led armies, because that really is your bread and butter. That's your original game. And they go into some greater detail here about saying, as a Hordes player, you kind of do want your Warlock-led armies to be going second, because we'll have sort of panned out all of the wrinkles and gotten all of the bugs out of the new system on the Warcaster-led armies, so that by the time we get to your Warlock-led armies, they're going to be really nice, smooth releases. They're not going to need a ton of rebalancing out of the gate. It's going to be better for you in the long run. So moving on to the next header, we've got Warroom is dead, long live Warroom. So this is obviously referring to the app that everybody uses to play the game and to maintain their armies and whatnot. There might be some people out there still using cards, but maybe they also use AOL for their email server. So, do with that what you will. Warroom will be a function within a new free Warmachine app. So Warroom is no longer the entire app. It's a sub-component or a sub-feature, subsection of a larger Warmachine app. The Warmachine app is going to have things like basically a digitized version of Prime magazine, or what was it called? not Primecast, that was the name of their podcast. No Quarter magazine. They did No Quarter Prime for a while. Then they did that 50/50 printed digital. Then they dropped the print. Then they dropped the digital. So now they're kind of bringing that back. There's going to be constant updates and erratas directly into the application. The application is going to be the only place where the rules exist. There will be no physical copy rule books. I can't remember if that's listed in this article here, but it is listed in one of these articles that I'm going over. I find that an odd choice for people that are into such a physical and tactile game to completely remove the physical form of the rules as an option at all to your player base. They said they may release some books going forward, but they are going to be majority fluff-based and storyline-driven releases. They're not going to be rule books because it is too hard to maintain rules that are released in a physical copy. It's much easier to just have only the digital rules that you can then very easily push and update, because the only place they are going to exist is in this Warmachine app. Moving on to a few more bullet points on that one. The Warmachine app will provide the game rules and all model rules for free, so you're not paying for decks anymore. No deck card purchases will be necessary. Now, there's a bit of a slip there when it comes to maintaining your lists in the app for your armies. You can have up to 3 lists stored for free. If you want more than 3 lists stored, now 3 is perfectly fine. They chose 3, obviously, because when you're playing in like a steamroller tournament, I believe you generally bring 3 lists to the tournament. So that's the minimum to allow players to play in organized groups. But if you want to hold more than 3, which I'm assuming 80% of the serious players out there do, there is a small monthly charge. I want to say it's something like $4.99 a month to be able to maintain more than 3 saved lists. But that's the only thing you're paying for. Everything else is free and included in the application, if I'm remembering correctly. And it's nice that you don't have to pay to look at all of the model's rules anymore, because you do need to do that to understand your opponents, whether or not you're building lists with those models. So I believe that's the right kind of move that they're doing here. I like the idea that they're putting more digital content out through the app. I think it's kind of a bummer for people that only have smartphones. If you don't have a nice large tablet, reading through large rule books or reading through, articles or even like painting guides isn't great if you're on like a little 5 or 6 inch phone screen. And not everybody has a nice like 7 to 12 inch tablet screen to work with. So that's a bit of a bummer. But again, I get all these decisions. For the most part, I agree with them. And then lastly, the Warmachine app will offer a subscription option for storing multiple army builds and receiving monthly premium content. I don't know how much of the premium content is going to be locked behind the paywall, but one thing that for sure is the number of lists that you can store. Moving on to the next category, we've got Evolve or Die. This is basically their justification for why they need to update the game. Mark IV is an evolution of the game. It's not just we're tweaking some rules. It's we are like hosing down the rule set and completely rebuilding a good amount of it from the ground up, removing some key mark rules, some really like prominent rules from the Warmachine and Hordes. Again, now just Warmachine game and rule set that have always been around that are just going to be gone. We're moving on to the new, like we're crossing the event horizon. So Mark IV will support 50, 75, and 100 point battles. They've done this constantly. When the game first came out, armies were listed in the hundreds, so you played like a 250 or a 500 or a 750. Then Mark II, I believe they knocked that down to like a 25, a 35, and a 50. Then Mark III, they sort of tweaked it and it went back to like a 35, a 50, a 75. And now it's going to be a 50, a 75, a 100. This is just sliding the scales around to come up with different round numbers that you're building your army to. It's not really going to impact the way the game functions. It's just those are the new point sets that you need to keep in mind when building lists. And as always, I'm sure the 75 is going to be where your tournament play, your organized play, your steamroller, your Midnight Madness, that's where those tournaments are going to live, right in the middle. 75, 50 is going to be your casual games. 100 is going to be your silly games that no one ever wants to play. Mark IV introduces command cards. Again, this is kind of something that they're pulling in from Warcaster, which to me is just a failed side game where they tested a bunch of these ideas on before leaving to die on the vine and shifting over their focus to Mark IV. But also, a lot of these have come from games like Warhammer that have had this kind of a rule mechanic for quite a while that we're now sort of just like gently tugging into our game design. Command cards, which provide one-off effects like mini feats that can be purchased as part of your force construction. Now, if you look deeper into this, basically you have some that are generic across your entire faction that any army can take and that don't really cost any additional build points when constructing your army because they don't have that much of an effect when you use them. And then there are going to be some that do have a point cost, probably on the lower end, something maybe like a cheap solo that you would bring in your list, that are more powerful and likely are going to be army specific to the army that you are playing within your faction. So they're going to be more thematic, slightly more powerful. Again, this is something that Warhammer 40K has had for quite a while now. They even function in the same way. You build them into your army. There are certain ones that you can choose from. And yeah, they work like mini feats. They're like one-off special abilities that you can trigger when a certain event occurs during the game or at a certain time during the game. Mark IV Warcasters have customizable spell racks. Again, this is something that I believe to some extent was an option in Warcaster. Again, that side game that they did. I saw a lot of it at Gen Con. They had quite a bit on the pegboards. I didn't see anybody buying any. I'm certainly not buying any more beyond the base boxes that we pre-ordered and then never even built because nobody plays it. Customizable spell racks. This makes sense because in the fluff, Warcasters have always been able to do this. It's a cool concept. Again, I'm pretty sure this is straight out of Warhammer 40K because I'm pretty sure that your leaders that are spell users or magic users have the option to decide which spells they're bringing to the fight. I think there might be a point buy system associated with that in Warhammer 40K. I don't know if there's going to be one here, but basically you're going to have 2 or 3 spells that your Warcaster always has because those are their specific spells, their thematic spells that relate to that Warcaster specifically, or Warlock. I'm assuming Warlocks are also going to have this. And then there'll be 2 or 3 other spell slots that are actually going to be customizable, likely based off of a list of faction-themed spells that all of the different Warcasters or Warlocks from within your faction can choose from. So that's cool. Lots of customization going into this to sort of adjust for the fact that now you're going to have a much smaller list of models to choose from because you're playing within an army, which is a subset of a faction. But to keep it feeling unique from game to game, you can now customize your Warcaster without having to switch your Warcaster. You're choosing from a list of spells. And on top of that, to go with that, again, feeling very 40K to me, Mark IV Warjacks are customizable with multiple weapon and head/cortex options. So you can swap out your left arm or your right arm. I believe they said that model kits are going to come with 4 separate right arms and 4 separate left arms and 3 different head options. Your head options are going to change the way that your jack functions. You might have some special attacks on one, not have those special attacks on another, but it might adjust your stat line so you're quicker with this head, slower with that head, but maybe you've got an arc node with that head. That's the type of things that it's going to change, although an arc node is a separate part of your jack, but you get the idea. Customization. Again, this is something that existed in 40K when you're bringing something like a Dreadnought, or even when you're bringing something like a heavy unit and you're choosing what weapons they're carrying with them. And here, this was also something that was introduced in Warcaster, but again, I feel like it was mainly a trial ground for seeing whether or not it would work in a Mark IV release, and now we see that they have decided that it does work and that they're going to move forward with it. Engineering the future. This is our next sort of subsection. This is about how they're going to be actually physically producing models going forward. Metal is no longer a viable material or product or to produce, models with due to rising costs. Agree, as well as many other reasons you shouldn't be using metal. Overseas plastic product is rising in cost and possess supply chain risks as well as difficulties in keeping products stocked. This is why basically most of the world outside of the US has had a hard time maintaining inventory of Warmachine, Hordes models or anything Privateer Press. And I agree, because of things that have happened in recent times, it has gotten a lot harder to maintain supply chains and hold on to the inventory and obtain the inventory that you need to produce goods. Mark IV models will be produced using 3D printing technology. I don't know where you've been, Privateer Press, but I'm glad you're joining us in the year 2022. Warjacks are supplied with multiple head and weapon options and are engineered with cavities ready for magnets, which are supplied in the Warjack kits, so loadouts can be easily changed between games. This is something that no one else that I know of has done before, and this is amazing. Supplying your models with built-in notches for magnets, and then including the magnets in the model kit. So you don't even have to do that. No drilling, no shaving, no adjusting the shape of your model's joint to fit a magnet in there, not even having to go out and buy the magnets. It's all in the kit. That's beautiful. That is S-class. Good on you. Good one there. Really, really proud of you guys for coming up with that decision. 3D printing production allows us to localize production in overseas markets to address accessibility of the products and eliminate additional costs of shipping and import fees. Basically, Europe is going to print their own minis using the blueprints that Privateer Press gives to their office in Europe printing them on their own local machines. This completely destroys any supply chain or transportation or customs transport issues, right? Like you're just going to build the stuff where you sell the stuff. This is a great idea. This is a wonderful sort of like futuristic look at producing miniatures. I love it. I love all of it. On top of that, the fact that you can now use a fusing plastic glue as opposed to a standard super glue is going to make model assembly and model durability just shoot through the roof. It's going to be so good. I got to handle some of these models at Gen Con. Not only do they have magnet slots in the shoulders with the magnets so that you can put them together, you might think like, oh, but if they've got a heavy weapon on a long arm that has quite a bit of material from the joint, that arm is constantly going to hang, right? Because the magnet doesn't actually apply enough friction to hold it at whatever pose I'm putting it at. There's also pieces of notched plastic in the shoulder so that once you get it into sort of like the functional dynamic position that it's meant to be posed in, those little notches kind of like socket into place and hold it there. And there is actually enough friction on the magnet, at least when they're new, to hold it at a good position. So like you can take a sword and like points it up, straight, down, at an angle, whatever you want. And that shoulder joint and that elbow joint or whatever it is going to hold its position fairly well. I messed around with a light jack, a heavy jack, some Warcasters. It's good stuff. And the models look beautiful. The quality of the prints, the techniques that they're using on the prints so that you can have hollow sections of the model, stuff you could never do with injection molding. They're really, really nice. So this is good stuff all around. Next up, we have SKUs. Again, this is sort of continuing off of the idea that we're working with a smaller list of models here because we're reducing the size of what you're playing and we're sort of breaking factions down into smaller groups. Each Mark IV army will possess a limited number of SKUs. If you don't know what a SKU is, an SKU, that's basically the ID number, the barcode, the item number that a blister or a solo or a jack box, what have you, has on it so that a store can scan it in and identify it and sell it to you. Making the line easier to stock for retailers and distributors. Core army starters will contain enough models to field a 50-point army with options. So now, like I said, 50 point is going to be your casual between friends game. It's going to be on the smaller side compared to what you would play in a tournament, but it gets you started with the game. I'm about to have some problems with this, but they're small problems, and I've done the math. I kind of see where they're coming from. So having fewer things to put on the shelf because there are more things in a box is good for retailers, and it's kind of good for players, right? It's kind of not, but it's kind of good. So a core box, an army box, not a faction, a specific army, is going to be 50 points worth, so a casual size game with options. That's solid. It's not enough for a 75-point game, though. It clearly defines that here because then it says adding an expansion box to a starter provides enough models to field a 75-point army with options. That's your tournament size army right there. That's your organized play. So now you're buying 2 of these boxes. Now, again, that's a lot better because, say, for example, we're talking about Grey Lords inside of Cador. The store now only has to stock for you to reach 75 points so that you can play an organized play 2 boxes, the starter box and the expansion box. That's awesome. That's 2 boxes, as opposed to blister of a Warcaster, blister of a solo, blister of a different solo, box of a unit, blister of a unit, box of a Warjack, 3 different boxes of a Warjack, duplicates of that Warjack, because maybe you want to field 2 in your army. That's a problem, and that's going to be resolved with this. Now, here's the problem that's going to be introduced with this. When you cluster things together in boxes like that, it puts a sticker price on that box that can be quite shocking to people that aren't used to the miniatures gaming community, and who can't do the quick math on what's actually included in that box and how much it should be worth. So if I scroll down here to these sort of teased prices for these boxes, it says that a core army starter box, so the one that you need to buy to start playing the game, and this is the smallest, not the smallest, but this is what you're going to buy to start playing the game. This is the starter box, is $200. That is a large entry sticker price for any game. Right? I don't own a board game that costs that much money. And if I did, I guarantee you it would play 8 players, right? And it would be massive. And it would be one of the most glamorous limited edition versions of a board game you've ever played. I don't think I've ever bought a miniatures box that big. The most expensive miniature I've ever bought was $165. And yes, I bought 3 of them at the same time because that was a hilarious list. And I only got to run it for a small period of time before they errated the rules so that you can't. But still, that was like the highest end, most expensive thing you could buy. And it was $165. $65. And I'm talking Privateer Press. I know there's some crazy boxes out there for $40K and for Age of Sigmar. But $200 for an entry-level sticker price seems terrifying. I feel like that's going to scare away a lot of players. However, what you get in that box is actually worth more than $200. So I hope I said $200. I might have just said $250. $200 for starter box. So it's fair. It really is fair. Like, look what's in the box, break down what those would have cost individually if we were still playing Mark III and packaging Mark III style. You're getting more than what you're paying for, but it is a big bunch of money to pay up front. A new player, a 12-year-old kid who wants to get at this game, can't just walk up and drop $50 on a starter box or $40 if they get it on sale. It's $200, kid. Save up. That's not great. Then the Army expansion box, which you need to add to the starter box to get into a tournament game or to be able to play organized play at the level that it's likely going to be played at, is $175 on top of the $200 you've already spent. And again, because you have to buy it in chunks, you can't easily scale up blister here, box there. It's $200. Okay, you want to go up? $175. We're at $375 now, and you're just reaching the level where you can play in like a local weekend tournament. That's a little terrifying. But again, if you look at what comes in the boxes, it's fair. So they're not screwing you here. And it's the new models, and it's the new 3D printed models, the higher quality models, the magnets with the jacks, with the slotted arms. It's totally worth it. But those sticker prices carry quite a bit of shock value. And then lastly, if you want to get up to the point where you can play in a 100-point game, which I don't think many people are going to do because that's usually the we've got an entire day to kill. Let's play a silly large game that's really not going to have any realistic interaction because there's just way too much going on and we're going to lose track and it's going to be nuts. But why not? That 100-point game requires you to add on several more components, which are going to cost you in the range of $15 to $65, depending on what you're buying, adding in additional jacks, jack kits, maybe a second Warcaster or a larger Warcaster option. They mentioned something called 80 millimeter base solos. 80 millimeters is not a base size in Warmachine and Hordes right now. I don't know if you know that or if you remember. There's 30, 40, 50, and 120. 80 is completely new, so I do not know what gap that's filling, but it's interesting. And from what I've read, I don't believe I've seen exactly what an 80 millimeter model is going to be yet, but they're going to cost between $55 and $65, and they're going to be large solos. So again, I agree with just about everything there, but there's some negative to it. Like I said, the sticker shock is going to be a problem for a lot of people, but when you do the math and you really look into it, it is fair. They're actually giving you a deal. They are. And it's going to be good for stores having to stock less on the shelves. Transitioning from Mark III to Mark IV and organized play. So again, this is going to be about organized play, obviously. We are committed to supporting Mark III events through the end of 2022. You have to, because they're already scheduled. Official Mark IV events and organized play will begin in 2023. Likely in February, we're hoping to actually have some of the first organized play for Mark IV at CaptainCon 2023, so look out for that. Privateer will focus on key signature events at conventions we attend while supporting third-party competitive events like the WTC and Warfare Weekend, which is taking up the Iron Gauntlet. So they're no longer going to manage the Iron Gauntlet as an international tournament or sort of organized arena themselves. They're handing that off to third-party groups to manage for them. Privateer Press themselves are stepping away from operating their own international organized play. Interesting. I'm not a big organized play guy, so frankly, I don't care. I'm sure it makes sense. I'm not going to look too much into it. In-store and club organized play kits will be available early in 2023. Again, they'll need to be because once the rules are out, stores are going to want to start running events if that's how they bring in their crowds and how they make money. I don't think anybody's surprised. They're not dropping Steamroller. Of course, they're not. They're just obviously it takes some time to get the organized stuff ready to go. What's next? Tomorrow, this was quite a while ago, download the beta rule document. I've read it a couple of times. 2 legacy demo armies. They're broken. And the rules for both the Orgoth Sea Raiders, which is going to be a new army box for Orgoth, which are going to be a new faction, and the Signar Storm Legion battle groups. Battle groups are basically when you used to play a starter box and it was just your Warcaster and some Jacks or your Warlock and some Beasts. This used to be called Mangled Metal or Tooth and Claw, I think. That's basically what these battle groups are. That's always what a battle group was, if you don't know the fluff. And you can take Mark IV for a test drive. Cool. I'm sure lots of people have been doing that up the wazoo. If you find any typos, errors, or bugs in the documents, let us know via feedback@privateerpress.com. Again, I'm sure that email has basically been knocked off the server by a flood of input over the last couple of weeks. And new Mark IV armies begin shipping this fall. Now, That's just the very first wave start this fall. I'm going to get to the timeline in a minute, but I'm guessing it's going to take them deep into 2024 to fully make the transition to the point where even half of the people that play now will have access to something similar to their favorite faction in a subset army form. There's still going to be about 50% of the market who either haven't made it out of Unlimited, which nobody wants to play, or who are just sitting around waiting for their specific flavor of a faction to be released as an army box. So last note here, Warmachine app beta release, which is the new version of the Warroom app. It's going to be the Warmachine app, which contains Warroom as well as many other things. The beta will be released end of October. You really need that to play. So you can't even properly play until end of October. And even that's a beta. So it's going to be super buggy. It's going to crash. It's going to have glitches. Things are going to be broken in it. Watch for more coming soon. So let's quickly go over this timeline here. I still have a lot I want to cover. This is feeling like a very long video, but this is a lot to talk about. Hopefully I haven't lost everybody yet. Here's the Mark IV roadmap. I'm going to zoom in on this and see if I can give you a breakdown. So Mark IV announced. We've done that. Beta rules released. We've done that. Battle group previews released at Gen Con. I saw them. They're great. Then we're into October, beginning of October. Starter sets released for Orgoth and for Signar. That's going to be the Sea Raiders and the Storm Legion. Those are the starter army boxes. So what you need to play a 50-point list, the smallest casual size, with some options for those two factions. So keep in mind right now, none of the rest of Signar has new models or well-built rules. None of the rest of Orgoth has been released. None of any of the other factions or armies for those factions have new models or probably properly balanced rules. Then middle of October, so that was beginning of October, middle towards end of October, we've got the beta launch of the app, meaning you can buy your models a couple of weeks before you can properly use them in a game. That's interesting. Then beginning of November, so a couple weeks after that, we've got the starter box for Cador. I believe this is going to be a Grey Lord's army. Again, not the whole faction. You still can't play the rest of Cador. You still can't really play anything other than what's been released in these 3 army boxes, because I guarantee you they will not have had the time to fully flesh out legacy rules for models in a way that balances them with new stuff, because you've got new features like customizable Warcaster spell lists and customizable Warjacks and several other things that just aren't going to work with models that pre-existed Mark IV. So still a very limited number of things you can play with here. Then middle of November, again, a couple weeks forward, some new Warcasters for those 3 armies, Orgoth, Signar, and Cador, but not the armies in total, not the factions in total, those specific armies that have been released. Then beginning of December, Warjacks A and B, some additional Warjacks for those 3 armies, not for whole factions, not for any other faction across Hordes or Warmachine, which is now just Warmachine, still just Orgoth, Signar, and Cador. Then end of December, so we're looking at Christmas, we've got some mercenary solos coming out. I'm willing to bet those are going to be new solos that exist only in Mark IV and can only be used with these new groups, because they're not going to build anything into Unlimited legacy models. They're just not focused on that anymore. They're moving forward. Expansions released. So this is so you can get up to, finally, we can get up to the size of armies needed to play organized games, event games, tournament games, 75 points. That's beginning of January. We're in 2023 now, and that's only for Orgoth and Signar. We've got nothing for Cador. So we're just getting to the point where we can play at the likely recommended level size for armies, and we're into 2023. And that's just for 2 small armies, which are subsets of 2 factions, when we've got 21 factions to look at. So yeah, really nobody's getting their stuff. Then we've got the Warmachine app launches in full end of January. Great. So now we've got a proper, hopefully functional war room. Then the expansion, so you can get up to 75 points now for Cador, beginning of February. Still only working with 3 small armies, subsets of factions. Haven't even touched the other factions yet. We're in February 2023. In-store and club organized play support releases end of February. That's, like I said, we're going to try to get that stuff earlier if we can and run it at Captain Con. 80mm solos for those 3 faction armies, not the factions as a whole, likely just the armies. Mid-March. Mid-April, we've got the starter set, so 50 points with some options for Retribution, at least that looks like Retribution to me, coming out mid-April. So now you've got 50 points there, still can't play with the big boys at 75 because you don't have enough points. And then jumping all the way to Gen Con 2023, so we're in August, Warlocks and Warbeasts join Mark IV fray. That's the entire, so we're out to 2023. We've only got 4 factions, 3 of which can play at 75 points with a single army, no other armies, 1 of which they can play at 50 points, 1 army. None of the rest of the faction haven't touched any of the other factions. And that jumps us all the way towards the end of the third quarter of 2023. There's no way they're going to get everything. There's no way there's going to be playable armies, even a single playable army at just 75 points per faction. There's no way they're going to reach that level until like 2025. Just not a chance. Maybe tail end of 2024. It's going to take them an entire almost 2 years to roll out 4 faction groups, single armies in each faction, one of which can't even be played in tournaments at the size that it's released at. Almost 2 years. It's going to take them total 3 to 5 years to get everybody one army they can play with for their faction, let alone all of the warcasters and warjacks and different storied sects of their army, their faction. That's going to take a decade. This is what I mean when I say I don't know if they're going to survive this release. They've undertaken so much here, and I agree with 100% of it, maybe 95% of it, or maybe I agree with 100%, but I've got some qualms. Fine. But the fact that they say they're going to we're going to be going full speed by the end of 2023. No, you're not. Not a chance in hell. You're going to be at 5% by the end of 2023. You're going to be at 100%, I don't know, 2028, 2026, maybe. And if we're talking like full, like you've revived almost all of the stuff that people love from all of the factions, 2030 is where the game would be back to like its glory day. With this new rule set, as far as the availability of models, or at least the types of models and the variants of models that have been released. Now, you don't need to bloat the game to have a variance of models. But what I'm saying is, if the only Signar army that you can play is the Storm Legion, that's fine. People love the Storm Legion, but there's at least 3 or 4 other armies inside of Signar that are core to their fluff, right? Like, for example, Trenchers. Where are Trenchers? When are they coming out? Well, they're not coming out anywhere in 2023. Right? It's still just August 2022 right now. We can go all the way to next August. There's no Trenchers, right? There's probably no Trenchers through the rest of 2023. Maybe they come out somewhere in 2024, maybe tail end of 2024, because I'm guessing they're going to want to focus a little more on Hordes. So we're talking 2 years basically from now before you can get the second of, I would say, the 2 most iconic armies of the most iconic and original faction. And there's like 19 factions, and each has at least 2 or 3 iconic, there's like 19 armies and at least 2 or 3 iconic factions per army. So yeah, we're talking like 5 or 6 years before you can make most people happy with what the game has to offer. Yeah, so I'm not even going to get into the rules changes. If this video does well and you guys want me to give you my ranting opinion on the mechanics changes to the game, which again, I 95% agree with, but people are going to hate them and people are going to lose their minds. I can do that. Just let me know in the comments down below if you want to see that as well, or give this video a thumbs up, whatever. But that all came out way too long ago. I apologize. I should have done this sooner. There's been so much going on. I hope you guys are doing well. I hope you're at least as interested in what's going on with Mark IV as I am. Am I going to buy models right off the bat and dive into it head first? No. I've really learned that lesson with Privateer Press. I've been beaten over the head with the 2x4 version of that lesson via Privateer Press. I will wait until, let's say, the first Hordes faction boxes come out end of 2023, and I'll see where the game's at. And maybe I'll buy a starter box, let alone the $375 to dive into the point level needed to play a TO style game, or I should say an organized event. But yeah, at least a year from now before I make any purchases towards it. I love what I'm seeing though. Very worried about it. Anyways, hope you guys are doing well. Have yourselves a good day, and I'll see you in the next one.